Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. Will be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Currently, we are T-minus 59 minutes, 10 seconds and counting to the launch of the latest batch of Starlink V2 mini satellites on board a Falcon 9 rocket, getting ready to lift off from the pad you see here on your screen at Space Launch Complex 40, or Slick 40, there at the Cape. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast today. Photographers Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane, standing by ready to take some still photography of the Falcon 9 rocket this afternoon. Nice change of pace from the last couple of Falcon flights we've seen here in Florida. The fog has lifted, and we've got a clear shot to the pad now today. So it should be a pretty darn beautiful ascension. Not really many clouds to speak of as you're just looking out the window. Some cumulus clouds hanging around, but should be some pretty smooth tracking this afternoon. If you're not following the fellas on X, you can find them at their handles here. Adam is at ABurnNYC, Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr. While you're there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can find us not only on X, but also on Threads, Facebook, and Blue Sky. We'll also be joined with tracking assistance today by our friends Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. As we're getting the broadcast underway here, I want to thank the now more than 1,700 of you who are joining with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button, sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue on through the count. I also want to extend a thank you to our moderators in the live chat. I see Callistia Lee joining us at this point in the broadcast, as well as Rick Donner. Appreciate the both of you. If you do happen to see any of the other mods cruise on in over the course of the next hour or so, be sure to give them a big old hello. We're, of course, able to do these live launch broadcasts thanks to our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Cumulus Granatus, JD, Lone Salopoulos, Ryan Snyder, Brandon Sardogs, Sulfur for Lunch, Skate Letter, Joni Mahoney, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about the launch, or just want to offer some support this afternoon, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will it be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we roll on through the count, which will be supporting us in what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is greatly appreciated. So thanks to Chuck Close, one of our wonderful channel members, for a $25 Super Chat. Appreciate you, Chuck. And want to welcome in new channel member Gary Moon, and a thank you to Captain Action for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Appreciate the generosity, Captain Action, and to that new channel member who was gifted membership, as well as to Gary Moon. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you both with us. And to our gifted member, if you haven't already, be sure to thank Captain Action in the live chat. We hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Speaking of sticking around, Joni Mahoney marking 2 months with us now as a member at the Mission Specialist level. Appreciate you, Joni. He says thanks for the live stream and engaging conversation. And yes, we love to support rich, robust conversation in the live chat as the countdown clock keeps ticking down to a hopeful T0 here in less than 55 minutes. You can help our moderators out by respecting those others who are in the live chat. I also kindly ask that you refrain from overtly delving into politics, as well as to be so kind as to converse in English so that our moderators can understand all the conversation that's happening and intervene when necessary. Last but not least, if you could refrain from using all caps, that would be fabulous. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the launch on tap today, Starlink 12-9 mission. 21 Starlink satellites on board this Falcon 9 rocket, heading up to low Earth orbit, 13 of which feature direct-to-cell capabilities. Today's flight will be the 164th launch of the V2 mini variety of SpaceX's Starlink satellites. Prior to this liftoff, they've sent up a total of 222 Starlink satellites so far this year. Today's flight will be the 10th dedicated Starlink mission in 2025, 11th overall, since there was a rideshare mission between Starlink satellites and what were believed to be Starshield satellites for the NRO. Now T-minus 52 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. As we're stepping toward the start of fueling, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline for today's mission. Milestones that we're watching for ahead of a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. Roughly T-minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director will give their go-ahead for the start of prop load. SpaceX does this poll electronically, so if they're in a good position to do so, it can be taken earlier, but generally speaking, T-minus 30 minutes is when that clear is given. Once fueling starts, it'll begin at the T-minus 35-minute mark with the loading of RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes is when they begin to load on a cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels, which is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will happen a few minutes after that on the second stage. T-minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP-1 loading wraps up. Then at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process gets underway. That's when SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to the loading of liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's second stage. Here at Pad 40, we see that visually manifest as the so-called big vent at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. That venting lasts until roughly T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, giving way to second stage LOX load about 30 seconds after that. T-minus 7 minutes, the engine chill down gets underway on the booster. That's when SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect those 9 Merlin 1D engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence gets underway. After pressurizing for that retract, we'll see the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff. Then here at the Cape, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true on the second stage, about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, Control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch 45 seconds before liftoff. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff coming up at 2:18 p.m. Eastern, 1918 UTC for our friends around the world. T-minus 49 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 47 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. Today's launch of the Falcon 9 rocket is, of course, not the only mission that's going to be lifting off here around the world. Coming up later this afternoon, Rocket Lab is also targeting an instantaneous launch of its Electron rocket from down in New Zealand. On board that Electron rocket are 5 satellites supporting the Internet of Things company in France called Canace. Today's Electron flight will be the company's 59th to date and the first of 2025. That mission targeting liftoff at 9:43 a.m. local time in New Zealand, 3:43 p.m. Eastern for us here on the East Coast, and 20:43 UTC for those around the world. Bringing it back here to the continental United States, it's also a busy time for SpaceX. Of course, they are preparing for this Falcon 9 rocket launch here in 46 minutes and some change. Over on the West Coast, tomorrow, currently, they are targeting the launch of another Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 11-10 mission. In between, though, down in Texas, they are also making strides towards Flight 8 for the Starship program. As you can see, Booster 15 has made its way out to Tower 1, where it's been loaded on the orbital launch mount in preparation for upcoming fuel loading and preparation for eventually a static fire test. These live pictures coming to us from our friends at Lab Padre. If you're not already subscribed to the Lab Padre channel here on YouTube, really should. They have great multiple 24-hour live cams positioned all around Starbase to keep you posted and up to date on the comings and goings that are happening down there. Lots of activity all the time, of course. This booster testing is just the very latest big public-facing activity that is on tap today. Time now, T-minus 42 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the live chat, I want to thank a few folks for their support today. Thanks to NAL Fanatic for joining us with channel membership at the Mission Specialist level. Welcome aboard. Also, welcome into Dave Oatway joining us at the Pad Leader level. I want to thank one of our moderators, Mark Otto, for joining us, helping out in the live chat as well as gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. So thanks to Mark for both of those things. Thanks as well to channel member and moderator Clisty Lee for also gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships, and to fellow channel member Ryan Snyder for gifting 5. So to our 25 newest channel members, welcome aboard to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Happy to have you here. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Ryan, Clistia, and Mark in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Speaking of sticking around, CL Sports Picks has been with us now for 15 months at the Mission Specialist level. Really appreciate that, CL. Thanks for your continued support. And a thanks to Axel Penn for a 10-pound super chat. Giving a shout out from Banana Creek, visiting from London. Lots of good launch viewing spots along Banana Creek in the Indian River Lagoon as well. Also should be pretty good beach viewing for those along the coastline. Places like Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach, Melbourne Beach, Indian Harbor Beach, Satellite Beach. As this Falcon 9 is going to be heading in a southeasterly trajectory. With a tip of the cap to where this Falcon's going to fly, let's go ahead and just talk about the trajectory, shall we? Now T-minus 40 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. Falcon 9 rocket, once it lifts off from Space Launch Complex 40, or Slick 40, there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As I just mentioned, we'll be flying in a southeasterly trajectory, heading away from Florida's Space Coast, following that green arc you see there on your screen. Following stage separation, the first stage booster that's supporting this mission, which today is B-1078, making its 17th flight, will follow that red arc and target landing on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. It's got 2 here on the East Coast, and the one on tap today is a shortfall gravitas. If successful, this will be the 97th booster landing for this particular drone ship and the 406th booster landing for SpaceX to date. SpaceX is working to certify its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. It's also doing the same with its payload fairings, which will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes, a little bit further downrange from where the first stage booster lands on the drone ship. SpaceX said in a presentation at the end of 2023 that it saves about $6 million per recovery effort. So it's an important part of their business model to retrieve, refurbish, and reuse these payload fairings as often as possible. They'll be brought back aboard one of their recovery vessels before being taken back through Port Canaveral and then over to the Hangar X site, where they will be examined and refurbished, and again turn around for future missions. Falcon 9 recovery, or excuse me, the fairing recovery vessel that's being used today is nicknamed Doug, after former NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, one half of the duo who flew the Demo 2 mission back in May of 2020. Now T-minus 38 minutes and counting. At this point, nominally speaking, SpaceX will have concluded their poll on the start of prop load, if they are in a good position to move forward with that. Fueling will begin in just a few minutes now at the T-minus 35 minute mark. Now T-minus 34 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should now be fueling their Falcon 9 rocket, which once again involves flowing RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages as the fuel, and liquid oxygen is the oxidizer on board the Falcon 9's first stage. Time now T-minus 32 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. As we're working to determine if fueling has in fact begun, as we suspect it likely has, I want to take a brief pivot, talk a little bit about the weather. No, not just making small talk. The 45th Weather Squadron actually forecast a pretty ideal outlook for today's launch opportunity. Greater than 95% chance of favorable weather at liftoff, with just the cumulus cloud rule as a potential spoiler. Fairly light clouds, trending between 7 and 12 miles per hour. You can see some movement from the American flag there near the countdown clock on the right-hand side of your screen. A couple of cumulus clouds out there, but nothing too aggressive or anything that may serve to impede this Falcon 9 rocket. The likelihood of it is very slim. This should be a pretty nice liftoff coming up here in a little more than half an hour. Just taking a look back at the Falcon 9 rocket, you can see that frost line starting to form near the base of the booster. If you look just above the tree line, just to the left of the rocket, as a matter of fact, you see those thin branches that are pointing toward the rocket, sort of leaning off to the right. They're pointing right at where the frost line is forming as the super cold densified liquid oxygen is flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. So the good visual indication that SpaceX is in fact fueling, that does lock them into T0 of the liftoff at 2:18 p.m. Eastern, 1918 UTC for our friends around the world. Time now T-minus 28 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. In addition to fueling beginning on the Falcon 9 rocket at this point, SpaceX is also loading that cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. The helium, of course, being important in order to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will be true on the second stage here in just a few minutes. Conditions out here at pad 40 considerably better than they were earlier this morning. I want to take a look at some video that was captured by our photographer Adam Bernstein. Let's see. There we go. You could see how densely foggy it was around the 9 o'clock or so hour this morning. Pretty hard to make out the Falcon 9 rocket. Again, the video in the big box is from earlier this morning. What you're seeing on the right-hand side of your screen, fortunately, are the live pictures that we've got right now. So considerably better conditions for a launch here in a little less than 27 minutes. As we're preparing to see the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket again, first stage booster supporting this mission, B-1078, will be flying for 17th time today. Before that happens, though, let's go ahead and step back through time and talk about where it's been before we see where it's about to go. As is the case with a number of Falcon 9 boosters, this one happened to start its launch history, sending up astronauts and a cosmonaut up to the International Space Station. This one was the Crew 6 flight, which lifted off almost 2 years ago at this point now, back on March 2nd of 2023. Sending up the crew on board the Dragon spacecraft called Endeavour. That was followed up by the second pair of O3B M-Power satellites, lifting off on April 28th of 2023. A quartet of Starlinks followed that. We had Starlink 6-4 on June 4th, 6-8 on August 7th, 6-16 on September 16th, and 6-31 on December 3rd. That was followed up by a mission for the U.S. Space Force, USSF 124, lifting off on Valentine's Day of last year. Back to Starlink land we go for 5 more flights. We had Starlink 6-46 on March 25th, 6-53 on April 23rd, 6-60 on May 28th, 10-2 on June 23rd, 10-6 on August 2nd. That was followed up by a launch for AST Space Mobile. 5 Bluebird satellites lifting off on September 12th of last year. After that, it's back to Starlink land we go. Starlink 10-3 on October 30th. 6-76 on November 27th. And most recently, Starlink 12-6 at the very tail end of last year. T-minus 23 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. Taking a closer look at the Falcon 9 rocket, you can really see the fueling that we were talking about earlier with that liquid oxygen now flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage, the frost line continuing to rise. Of course, considerably colder liquid oxygen than the warmer Florida atmosphere and the air around it. Just giving us that vapor that you're seeing there wrapping around the skin of the rocket. Coming up here in the next couple of minutes, SpaceX will begin to chill the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen loading. We see that manifest as the so-called big vent. That visually will begin at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. Taking a look back at the live chats, we're T-minus 21 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. I want to thank the now more than 5,000 of you who are watching with us live this Saturday afternoon. We appreciate those of you who are here with us at this point in time. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button. Sharing the stream allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank GamerDad737 for a $10 super chat, who says, shout out to Gamer Coder and his mom watching their first launch at Banana Creek. Enjoy. It's always exciting to be with folks for their first launch. Hopefully you've got some good seats, as it sounds like Gamer Coder and his mom do today. But if you don't happen to be in the vicinity where you can see the Falcon 9 fly with your own eyes, we appreciate you being here to check it out with us. And we're coming up on the start of that big vent here in about a few seconds. And there you see the big vent getting underway. Good visual indication that fueling is happening as expected here at Pad 40. Now just a little more than 20 minutes away from the planned launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, supporting Starlink 12-9 mission, sending an additional 21 Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit, 13 of which have direct-to-cell capabilities. Now T-minus 16 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. With the big vent tapering off, SpaceX is preparing to pivot to loading liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's second stage, coming up here in just a little more than 10 seconds. T-minus 14 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. Quite blustery here, cutting across our mics, but as far as the winds impacting the launch, shouldn't be much of an issue. Talking about the payload on board this Falcon 9 rocket, getting ready to lift off in 14 minutes. 21 Starlink satellites in total, 13 of which feature direct-to-cell capabilities. This will be the 11th launch so far this year featuring Starlink satellites, and the 10th dedicated Starlink mission. As of last year, SpaceX began to introduce what it calls the Starlink optimized V2 mini satellites. To date, they have not disclosed how many of these have been launched, but with their introduction, they are a lighter weight version of the Starlink, now only about 1,267 pounds, or about 575 kilograms. Previously, they were roughly 800 kilograms in weight, as seen in the version of the V2 Mini that has been flying previously, in that middle picture there. With our solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. And they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43 degrees inclination. Thanks to the folks over at HGO Robotics and Black Sky, we've got this nice image of a V2 Mini satellite on orbit. This is an artist's rendering here of what those satellites look like. It's connected by their so-called laser mesh. Prior to this launch today, SpaceX has sent up a total of 7,854 Starlink satellites. according to astronomer and expert orbital tracker Jonathan McDowell. As of February 2nd, there were 6,992 Starlink satellites still in orbit. Before we get our pad level views of the rocket and some mission audio coming in, let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline, the sequence of nominal events that we're expecting with a good liftoff through deployment of the Starlink satellites. For those who have just newly joined the broadcast, SpaceX is targeting a liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket at 2:18 p.m. Eastern, 1918 UTC, with the rocket flying in a southeasterly trajectory once it leaves the pad. About a minute, 10 minutes into flight, it will pass through max Q with a point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Following that, there will be a sequence of a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff when the 9 Merlin engines powering the Falcon 9 first stage will conclude their first firing. First and second stages will separate, and then the Merlin vacuum engine on the Falcon 9's second stage will ignite at about T plus 2 minutes and 35 seconds to begin its first burn. A little bit after the 3-minute mark, the payload fairings encapsulating the Starlink satellites will be jettisoned, and those will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for retrieval. Roughly 3 minutes after this, the first stage entry burn begins, when 3 of the Falcon 9's engines come back to life for a burn lasting a little bit less than 30 seconds, helping to slow the vehicle down considerably. That'll set up the landing burn to begin about T plus 7 minutes 48 seconds after liftoff. This just uses one of the engines, the one right in the middle of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's targeting a drone ship landing on the ship called a shortfall of gravitas. That should happen at about T plus 8 minutes and 13 seconds post liftoff. T plus 8 minutes 38 seconds is when the Merlin vacuum engine will conclude its first burn. Assuming it enters into a nominal parking orbit, it will continue to coast until about T plus 53 minutes and 58 seconds, when there will be a brief 2-second burn of that engine, helping to circularize the orbit, put it on the correct trajectory, for the Starlink satellites to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 7 seconds. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 now T minus 8 minutes and counting. T minus 7 minutes and counting. At this point, the engine chill down sequence is getting underway, where SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. Taking a quick look at our live chat here. First off, want to thank the now 13,000 plus of you who are watching with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big solid just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find this live coverage as we proceed into the final 6 minutes of the count. I also want to thank channel member Heather K for a $2 super chat. Appreciate that, Heather, who says, "My son is watching. Can I get a shout out to Cade?" Cade, glad you're with us, my friend. Now a hair under 6 minutes to the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. At this point, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. In the next 30-ish seconds, we should start to get pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket and mission audio to bring to you as well. About a minute away from the beginning of the strong back retract sequence.
Nine tanks are pressurizing for strong back lower.
Good call from SpaceX. Also getting some great pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket as we're now approaching the 4-minute mark before liftoff.
Strong back lower has started.
Just a quick little bit of housekeeping here. You'll notice our clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen slightly different from what you're seeing from SpaceX in the big box right now. Reason being, the clock in the upper right is our clock in real time. What's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay, so we'll be making our call-outs based on that real-time clock as long as we have tracking level views of the Falcon 9 rocket from our cameras on the ground. Seeing now those clamp arms opening up just beneath the payload fairings. The transporter erector will be pulling back momentarily. Now less than 3 minutes to go on the Falcon 9 rocket before liftoff. At this point, the first stage LOX tank should be full.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
Good call from SpaceX. We're now waiting for the same to be true on the Falcon 9's second stage.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
Good call from SpaceX. At this point, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Seeing the ground gas closeouts here at the bottom of your screen. SpaceX is purging the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines. Now less than a minute and a half to go before launch.
Gas launch closeouts has started.
Good call from SpaceX. We're now approaching a minute before liftoff. The Falcon 9 will enter its startup sequence. Should hear that call out from SpaceX in about 15 seconds.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
40 seconds to go. Our next and final big call will be the SpaceX launch director giving their go for launch here momentarily.
So launch director on countdown 1, go for launch.
With that call, SpaceX is now less than 30 seconds away from the liftoff of its Falcon 9 rocket here on a sunny Saturday afternoon. 15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 12-9 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Flight now. Falcon 9 traveling faster than the speed of sound and passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Coming up, we'll be hearing the call for MVAC engine chill. SpaceX is conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine for the start of its burn. Now a little more than 2 minutes into flight. Coming up on a few different events in fairly rapid succession here. First stage main engine cutoff momentarily. Nico. We have stage separation. And MVAC ignition.
Main engine cutoff. Stage separation confirmed. MVAC ignition.
All good callouts from SpaceX. We should be seeing the payload fairings deploy in just a few seconds. There go the payload fairings. Again, these will splash down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean with the support of steerable parachutes.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Good call out from SpaceX. Now a little more than 3.5 minutes into this mission so far. Coming up next will be the start of the first stage entry burn. as 3 of the engines on the Falcon 9 first stage booster will come back to life to begin to slow the vehicle down. Some really nice views from the Falcon 9's onboard cameras today, and excellent work by our tracking team as well, with some wonderfully clear skies. A little more than 4 minutes into flight. First stage booster B-1078 will be attempting to make its 17th landing today, targeting a touchdown on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. First stage booster appears to have reached its apogee at about 114 kilometers altitude. Now starting to make its descent.
Both vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
And a good confirmation of a nominal flight so far by SpaceX. Now 5 minutes into this mission. The dot that you see there in the middle of the big box, that is our view still of the upper stage of this Falcon 9 rocket today, as it continues to cruise away from Florida's Space Coast, now at a speed of about 12,000 kilometers per hour, now at 150 kilometers in height, or in altitude. Now 6 minutes into the mission. First stage entry burn will be happening now in real time.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Given the lighting conditions, it's a little bit tricky to see the entry burn, even though we're not being obstructed as much by clouds today. Much easier to catch at night. It's burn lasting a little less than 30 seconds in total.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
With the conclusion of the entry burn, we're now looking towards the start of the landing burn at about T plus 7 minutes and 48 seconds, so roughly a minute away from now. Still appears to be a good burn on the Merlin vacuum engine on the right-hand side of your screen, supporting the second stage. SpaceX is targeting a booster landing for its Falcon 9 rocket in the southern hemisphere down in New Zealand. Rocket Lab is also beginning to load liquid oxygen on board its
Stage
Electron.
1 transonic.
That's Electron rocket. For those tracking the first Electron mission of the year, whether 90% go for that flight.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Good call from SpaceX. The flight termination system on the Falcon 9 upper stage has been safed. No longer needed at this stage in flight.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And a good 17th landing for B-1078.
One vac shut down.
With a good call for the shutdown of the Merlin vacuum engine, presumably it will have entered into a nominal parking orbit, where once again it will coast until T plus 53 minutes, 58 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn of that Merlin vacuum engine, setting up for the Starlink satellites to be deployed at about T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 7 seconds. As a heads up for those launch fans still around with us at this point in time, I want to remind you that SpaceX is targeting one more launch this weekend. On deck from the West Coast is the Starlink 11-10 mission, a batch of 23 Starlink satellites getting ready to launch in a Falcon 9 rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base. For those who want a little side-by-side with the big game, you can put our channel up, have that maybe as a picture-in-picture for you, as liftoff is currently targeted for 4:03 p.m. Pacific. That's 7:03 p.m. Eastern, or 00:03 UTC for our friends around the world. Put another way, it's about 30-ish minutes post the kickoff of the big games. So, again, we'll be here ready to support live launch coverage of that mission. For those of you who are not down in New Orleans watching that game happen or watching it on TV, wherever you are around the world, I'd love to see you stop by for a little bit to check out the flight of the Falcon 9 rocket and our coverage thereof. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Spaceflight now. Turn on notifications, click that bell icon. That way you'll be notified when we begin our live launch coverage. Turning to the mission stats that currently stand with this Falcon 9 mission here back on the East Coast, with a good liftoff and landing of the booster B-1078. That wraps up its 17th flight in its history so far. This was SpaceX's 434th Falcon 9 launch to date. No Falcon Heavies on the calendar yet. 17th Falcon 9 launch of 2025. This marked the 378th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. 17th orbital mission for SpaceX on the year so far. This was the 140th orbital launch within the last 365 days. This was the 231st SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and the 285th overall orbital launch from that pad as well. Here are the Falcon family of rocket flights so far since 2010 when they began flying. Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 97th booster landing successfully on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. That marked SpaceX's 324th drone ship landing and the 406th overall booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 13th orbital launch from the Sunshine State, the 18th orbital launch from U.S. soil, 18th from U.S. Rocket Company, and the 27th around the world. Speaking of around the world, once again, Rocket Lab beginning to fuel its Electron rocket for its first launch of the year from down in New Zealand. You can head over to our website, spaceflightnow.com. Got the YouTube link up there to check that mission out. Live coverage from Rocket Lab starts about 20 minutes before liftoff. So far, no orbital launch failures on the year so far. Here's where the pie chart now stands. U.S. with 18, China with 6, India and Japan with 1 launch apiece. Just a slight correction to that. Actually, should be 1 launch from Russia as well in this pie chart. make that correction for the next go around coming up tomorrow. And with 14 minutes post liftoff, that'll go ahead and wrap up our live coverage here today on this sunny Saturday. We're going to go ahead and power things down here on the Space Coast, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day as well. Thanks briefly, though, to some folks in the live chat. Thanks to channel member Goku for being with us as a channel member for 3 months, who says, thank you for another wonderful view of the launch. Appreciate your support of the coverage, Goku. Channel member moderator Clistia Lee with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Clistia, who says, if you haven't already, please show the team some love and support by clicking the like button. They work hard to bring these live streams to us. Thank you for the kind words, Clistia, and for your support and help as a moderator today. And thanks to Pierce Mama, one of our channel members, for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships, ending off the stream with some lovely generosity. As you can see, the strong back coming into an upright position there at the pad. SpaceX prepares to turn around this pad as quickly as possible for future flights. Next one coming up, I believe, is the Starlink 12-18 mission, targeting no earlier than February 11th. That's this coming Tuesday. Want to thank our friends P. Carsons with Max Q Productions, Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for their help in tracking the Falcon 9 rocket today. I also want to thank our launch photography team of Michael Kane, Adam Bernstein. You can find the fellas here on their social channels as well as Spaceflight Now. Big thanks to our moderators who've been helping us out in the live chat today. Thanks to Rick Donner, Mark Otto, and Clistia Lee for being with us this Saturday afternoon. Thanks as well to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, though, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.